The hero's journey isn't a cute story formula. Is the operating system behind every serious transformation you've ever lived through. The moment life stops making sense, the moment your old identity starts cracking, you were not breaking down. You were being initiated. Across myths, temples, and hidden fraternities, the same pattern repeats. A self asleep inside routine is disrupted, descends into chaos, confronts what it has avoided, and returns rebuilt. Modern depth psychology gave this process a new vocabulary, but it did create the map. It simply recognized an ancient truth. Consciousness evolves by dying to its previous shape. And if the Gnostic teachers were right, awakening is not about collecting beliefs. It's about remembering what you are beneath the mask. By the end of this film, you will know exactly where you are on the 12-stage map and what your next step demands. This is T Entertainment. It's orientation. When a myth scholar of the last century compared legends across continents, he found something unsettling. The cultures were different, but the pattern underneath was the same. A normal life gets interrupted. A threshold is crossed. A trial by fire begins. Then, if the seeker survives, something returns that can restore the world that first resisted them. Later, a pioneer of depth psychology explained why this repetition is inevitable. These gods and monsters aren't literal creatures outside you. They are inner forces, instincts, fears, buried memory, and the hidden intelligence of the unconscious shaping your life like an initiation ritual. That's why the journey does to feel optional. Once the call arrives, ignoring it doesn't bring peace. It creates a quiet sickness, a private civil war between who you pretend to be and what you actually are. The ancient esoteric schools preserved this same cycle in a different vocabulary. Purification, rupture, reintegration. First, you leave the familiar. Then you are dismantled. Then you rebuild around a deeper center. 3 movements, 1 law. Transformation always begins as descent before it becomes ascent. If you want to understand why the hero's journey feels so personal, you have to understand one thing. The hero is not a person in a story. The hero is a function inside you. It's the part of your mind that refuses to remain unconscious. The old mystical traditions describe this as a secret fire hidden inside ordinary life. A force that pushes the soul toward liberation, even when the personality begs for comfort. In the language of inner alchemy, the first stage is always the same. The raw material is discovered. The confused, heavy, unresolved substance inside you finally becomes visible. Not as a concept, but as a pressure, a hunger, a dissatisfaction that refuses to be silenced. This is why the beginning of the journey often looks like chaos. A breakup that exposes your dependency. A career collapse that reveals your emptiness. A sudden obsession with meaning that doesn't go away. People call it misfortune, but initiation has always worn the mask of crisis. The old self must be disturbed before it can be reformed. And the more rigid your identity, the more violent the awakening feels. This is the first law of transformation. The call does not arrive to ruin you. It arrives to reveal you. But here's the part nobody likes to admit. The call is almost always refused. Not because the seeker is weak, because the ego is designed to survive. Your ordinary identity is a fortress built out of habits, labels, social roles, and familiar pain. It would rather suffer predictably than risk dissolving into the unknown. So the mind does what it always does when truth threatens it. It negotiates. It rationalizes. It distracts. It says, later. It says, not now. It says, This is spiritual, this is just stress. And for a while, that works. You can cover the call with entertainment, achievement, substances, relationships, endless noise. But the hidden intelligence beneath your awareness does stop. It escalates. The dream returns. The anxiety grows sharper. The same lesson repeats through different events until the message becomes undeniable. The current version of you cannot contain what you were meant to become. The ancient initiatory schools warned that refusal has a cost. Not supernatural punishment, psychological decay. When the inner world demands growth and the surface personality refuses, energy turns against itself. The result is not peace, but stagnation that feels like slow suffocation. This is why the journey is unavoidable. You either accept transformation consciously, or life forces it unconsciously. Then something strange happens. The moment you stop running, assistance appears. Not always as a person, but as timing. As a book that lands in your hands at the exact moment you need it. A sentence you overhear that pierces you like an arrow. A mentor who shows up without you seeking them. In mythology, this is the guide, the mysterious helper with tools or hidden knowledge. In depth psychology, it's the psyche compensating for your blindness, an inner wisdom rising to meet your decision. The esoteric traditions call this the inner teacher, the silent intelligence behind intuition. And here's the unsettling part. The help was always there. It just wasn't visible until you committed. Because transformation does to respond to curiosity. It responds to sincerity. Once the decision becomes real, once you say, even privately, I will face what I am avoiding, your perception changes. You start seeing patterns that were previously hidden. Not because the world has magically rearranged itself, but because you've shifted the center of your attention. What was unconscious begins cooperating with what is conscious. The divided self starts becoming a unified force. This is the first gift of the journey. Not comfort, not certainty, guidance. A torch appears, but only after you step into the dark. Now comes the moment that separates spectators from initiates. The threshold. This is the point of no return. The line you cross where your old identity cannot be fully recovered because you've seen too much. In stories, it looks like leaving home, entering the forest, stepping into the underworld. In real life, it's the moment you stop pretending. You begin therapy and realize you can't see yourself. You abandon a role that kept you safe, but slowly killed you. You commit to a discipline that exposes every weakness you've hidden behind personality. The threshold always has guardians, not literal monsters, but resistance, fear, doubt, the opinions of others, the inner voice saying you were foolish for changing. These forces aren't enemies. They are psychological filters. They test whether your desire for truth is stronger than your desire for comfort. This is why genuine transformation never begins with inspiration. It begins with sacrifice. You pay with certainty. You pay with the old narrative. You pay with the identity built to survive childhood, society, and expectation. Ancient initiations symbolized this as death before rebirth. The old self must be buried. And when you cross this line, something becomes clear. The journey is not about acquiring knowledge. It's about becoming someone who can survive the truth. After the threshold comes the descent. The stage mystics feared, poets described, and psychologists quietly recognize. The dissolution. This is the belly of the beast, where the old self breaks apart. In the ancient inner alchemical texts, this is the black phase, the period where everything familiar rots. Your confidence collapses. Your story about who you are no longer feels believable. You start noticing patterns you spent years denying. The manipulation, the craving, the hidden rage, the cowardice disguised as politeness. This is self-hate. It's clarity. And clarity feels brutal at first because the mind was built to protect you from seeing too much at once. Now the protection is gone. Old defenses fail. Repressed material leaks into dreams, moods, and intrusive realizations. You feel exposed to yourself. To outsiders, this can look like depression, panic, instability. But the inner meaning is different. It's the psyche stripping away the false structure so something real can be built. The body often reacts too. Insomnia, exhaustion, appetite changes. Because identity is to just an idea. It's a biological pattern. This is the dark initiation most people avoid. But the law is absolute. What you call your breakdown may be the first honest moment of your life. Not punishment. Preparation. The seed must split before it becomes a tree. Once the old self has cracked, the trials begin. Not dramatic battles. Subtle tests that repeat until you change. The same triggers. The same temptations. The same emotional patterns. Life becomes a training ground, and the unconscious becomes your instructor. This stage is misunderstood because people think transformation is one moment of revelation. It is teeth. It's repetition under pressure. The psyche forces you into situations that reveal what you still cannot integrate. If you crave control, you meet chaos. If you hide behind charm, you face rejection. If you fear abandonment, relationships become mirrors. In-depth psychology, this is ego strengthening, the capacity to hold tension without escaping into denial. And every successful trial does one thing. It returns energy that was trapped inside conflict. When you stop running from parts of yourself, you stop leaking power. In the symbolic language of inner alchemy, this is purification through fire. Not moral purity, structural purity. Removing what is false, burning away what is performative, distilling the essential from the excessive, and slowly, something new appears. A self that can endure discomfort without collapsing, that can face truth without needing immediate relief. That's why the trials feel relentless. They reforging stamina, because the next stages require you to encounter forces far deeper than personal trauma. The trials are not obstacles on the path. They are the path. At the center of the journey comes an encounter that feels like salvation, the meeting with the goddess. But don't misunderstand the symbol. This isn't simply romance. It's the psyche encountering unconditional wholeness. This is the moment you experience acceptance without performance, love without bargaining, meaning without achievement. In depth psychology, it's the soul meeting the inner feminine principle, the part of you that connects, feels, imagines, and knows through intuition rather than conquest. For many seekers, this stage arrives as a relationship that breaks the armor around the heart. For others, it's a spiritual experience so intimate it dissolves shame. For others, it's meeting a teacher, a book, or an art form that makes them feel recognized from the inside. The essential pattern is the same. Something shows you what you could be if you stopped punishing yourself. And that's why this stage is dangerous. Because the ego can treat the experience as a drug. Instead of integrating it, you cling to it. You become addicted to the feeling of being rescued. The ancient mysteries spoke of this as sacred union, a balancing of opposites inside the soul. Not domination, but reconciliation. Logic with feeling, strength with receptivity, discipline with compassion. This stage heals a fundamental wound, the belief that you are separate from life, that you must earn your right to exist. But it is not the end. It is the midpoint, because the very force that offers comfort will soon test whether you can remain free. Right after the soul tastes wholeness, the next trial arrives wearing a beautiful mask: temptation. And this stage is misunderstood because people assume it's about lust. It's not. It's about attachment. When you finally touch peace, the mind whispers, "Stay here forever." When you finally feel loved, it whispers, "Never risk losing this." When you finally find meaning, it whispers, "Protect it at all costs." And without noticing, you trade liberation for dependency. The ancient traditions warned that every gift carries a shadow. The same force that nurtures can also keep you small. It can seduce you into comfort, spiritual sleep, or emotional addiction. Anything that prevents you from completing the work of integration. This is why the symbol appears as the temptress, not evil, but enchanting. The trap is pain. The trap is pleasure used as an excuse to stop evolving. Psychologically, it's the return of old coping strategies in a more refined form. You don't escape with chaos anymore. You escape with bliss, with romance, with aesthetics, with a personality that looks enlightened but avoids accountability. The test is simple and ruthless. Can you receive the medicine without becoming intoxicated by it? Because the path is not meant to be a permanent retreat. The path is meant to produce a human being who can carry truth into ordinary life. Now the journey turns hard in a different way. After the heart has been opened, you must face authority, the father principle. Not your personal father necessarily, but the inner force of law, judgment, responsibility, and consequence. This is where seekers often fail because it feels like spiritual betrayal. You wanted freedom, and now you meet discipline. You wanted love, and now you meet standards. You wanted transcendence, and now you meet accountability. In depth psychology, this is confrontation with the internal judge, the voice that punishes, shames, restricts, and demands perfection. But beneath that distorted voice is something essential: structure, logos, the capacity to choose reality over fantasy. The task is not rebellion. It's integration. The goal is to stop being ruled by the father archetype and to become its mature expression. That means owning your life, ending self-deception, taking responsibility for your patterns without collapsing into guilt. This stage can feel like standing in front of a cosmic mirror where excuses evaporate. You see the cost of your choices. You see where you betrayed your values. You see where you harmed others to protect your identity. And then comes the deeper realization. The authority you feared is also your own power. To atone is literally to become at one. You stop fighting the principle of law and become aligned with it, not as punishment, but as clarity. Because without structure, awakening becomes delusion. Then, if you endure the confrontation, something changes in the center of you. This is the moment of apotheosis, where the ego stops acting like the ruler of your inner world and becomes what it was always meant to be, a servant of something deeper. Mystics describe this as illumination. Gnostic teachers described it as direct knowing, an inner recognition that does depend on belief or persuasion. Depth psychology describes it as the emergence of the self, the totality of your psyche reorganizing around wholeness rather than fear. This is not the ego disappearing. It's the ego being dethroned. Your personality still exists, but it no longer dictates reality. The need to be admired weakens. The need to win fades. The frantic hunger for certainty dissolves. You can finally sit in mystery without panic. In the symbolic language of transformation, this is the creation of the inner stone, a stable center that cannot be broken by external events. Not because you were numb, but because you reintegrated. People often imagine this stage as constant bliss. It's something rarer, inner sovereignty. You no longer need reality to be easy in order to be steady. You can face suffering without becoming it. You can face pleasure without being owned by it. And that's why the world's traditions called it rebirth. Because the person who crosses this threshold does not return to normal life as the same being. They return as someone who has met their own depths and survived. Now the ultimate boon appears, and it's important to understand what this really is. The boon is not a prize for being spiritual. It's a function you unlock after integration, the ability to transform experience into meaning. In myth, it looks like fire stolen from the gods, a healing cup, a sacred word, a hidden treasure. But psychologically, it's the recovered power that was trapped inside conflict. When the psyche stops fighting itself, energy becomes available for creation, for courage, for truth. This is why the boon often feels like a new form of intelligence. Not academic knowledge, lived insight. You begin to see patterns instantly. You recognize projections. You understand people without needing to judge them. You can hold paradox without collapsing into cynicism or blind optimism. And the tradition is clear. This gift is not just for you. The boon is always meant to serve more than the hero. Otherwise, the journey would end in ego inflation, the most seductive spiritual trap of all. The real treasure is that you become useful, not as a performer of wisdom, but as a living example that transformation is possible. You don't preach, you radiate. You don't dominate, you stabilize. In practical life, this may show up as creative work, leadership, healing ability, teaching, or simply a presence that changes the emotional atmosphere around you. You become a kind of medicine, not because you are perfect, but because you are real. But there's a final demand. The boon must return to the world that first resisted you. This is where the journey becomes serious, because leaving the old world was hard, but returning is harder. The return forces you to translate the unspeakable into something human, to carry the inner truth into deadlines, conflict, family dynamics, and ordinary noise. The first reaction is often refusal. You want to remain in the elevated state, protected from the stupidity and brutality of the world. Many seekers become trapped here. They don't return. They escape. They build identities around being above ordinary life. But that is awakening. That is avoidance wearing sacred clothing. Then comes the flight. You try to bring the insight back, but the old forces pull at you. Habits reappear. People pressure you to become who you used to be. The same environment that shaped your old identity tries to reclaim you. This is why the myths say the hero sometimes needs rescue. Not because you were weak, but because reintegration is not an individual act. You need community, allies, relationships that support the new you. A structure strong enough to hold transformation in place. The return threshold is crossed when you can speak truth in a language people can hear. When you can embody realization without needing to advertise it. When your inner change becomes visible as action, boundaries, honesty, discipline, service. The return is proof of the journey. Without it, the awakening is just a private hallucination. And this is the final achievement, mastery of two worlds. Not the fantasy of being untouchable, but the ability to move between depths and daily life without splitting yourself in half. You can sit with mystery without losing practicality. You can live in society without becoming a slave to it. This is freedom to live. The ending that is to ending, but a new beginning. Because transformation is not a one-time event. It's a lifelong dialogue between consciousness and the forces beneath it. The difference is that now you are awake inside the process. You no longer confuse your mask with your essence. You no longer worship your thoughts as truth. You can observe fear without obeying it. You can feel desire without being possessed by it. You can experience pain without making it your identity. The ancient traditions said the final proof of transformation is ethical. Not moral performance, but natural integrity. When you stop experiencing yourself as a separate, threatened fragment, harming others becomes irrational. Compassion stops being a virtue and becomes an obvious consequence of wholeness. This is why real initiation always ends with responsibility. The one who has crossed the darkness owes something to the world. Guidance, creation, service, or simply presence. You don't return to impress anyone. You return to carry the torch. Because the treasure was never out there. It was always the fire inside you, waiting to be uncovered, refined, and made real. And the hero, the quest, and the gold were never separate things.